Hello everyone. If it's your first time to the channel, welcome, and if it's not, welcome back. I really appreciate all the support lately. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like and a subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. For today's video, we're going to be practicing with Kinemon, as although it's fallen a little bit out of favor, it's still really strong in the meta, and can realistically beat any deck as long as you draw what you need. So with that, let's get started with the deck list. We're running 4 of the Kozuki Momonosuke, which is a searcher that can search out a good portion of the deck. It can search out your Toki blockers, it can search out your Izos, your Raizos, your Okikus, your Yamatos, your Odins, your boss monsters. We're running 3 of the Kozuki Toki, which is just a 1-drop blocker. We're running 4 of the Beige, same thing, it's just another 1-drop blocker. 4 of the Bonnie, which is a searcher for a good portion of your deck. And for a 2K, I'm trying out Chopper. I kind of like Chopper more than I like Carrot for a 2K, because Chopper being a 2-drop, I can play him on turn 2, or my turn 1, but when I have 2 Dawn. Whether that be against Zoro, or he can be pretty useful in the Law matchup, whereas I just don't really see where realistically I would ever play Carrot. Running 4 of the Scratchman of Pooh, which is also another 2K counter. We're running 4 of the Izo, which is a 2K counter but can also rest 4 drops or less. Running 4 of the Raizo, which is a very consistent draw engine. We're running 4 of the Okiku, 4 of the Yamato, 2 of the Blocker Law. We're running 3 of the Captain Kid blocker, 1 of the 8-drop Captain Kid, just because if you drop the 8-drop against blue, most of the time you should just outright win that matchup. 3 of the Kozuki Odin, which is the boss monster of the deck, especially with Kinemon. If you can play him on curve, he's just super strong. If you can play him for 7 Dawn. And then we're running 3 of the Punk Gibson. After playtesting the deck, there are a few more changes you could do. You could add a few more blockers. I'm not playing the 2-drop killer blocker in this case, so you can add that. You can add a few more 2Ks if you'd like. But overall, the deck performed pretty well, and yeah, it's just overall pretty solid list. So with that, let's start getting into some gameplay. For the first match, we actually have the Kinemon Mirror matchup, which in this case you want to go second, just because being able to play your Okiku on your first turn is super strong. Our opponent got to choose though, and he chose to go second. So I'm considering keeping this hand. I decided to keep it because I do have a blocker, which at the moment it's not a blocker, but on my next turn I'm going to play my 4-drop Yamato. And so it'll be considered a blocker at that point. And that's what I do. So I use my leader ability to be able to play my Yamato. I rest the Okiku, and then I swing at the Okiku. And so here my opponent does decide to save it. Here, if he uses the Okiku effect to rest my Yamato, then I still have the Toki blocker. But if he uses the Okiku effect to rest the Toki blocker, then if he attacks it, it essentially acted as a blocker anyway. One thing that I definitely noticed while playtesting with Kinemon is you don't have a lot of counter, because your Okikus, your Yamatos, your Kids, your Odins don't have any counter power. And so here, my opponent makes a really good play, and he actually plays the Izo and uses Okiku effect to rest both of my characters. Which it's pretty bad for me. He leaves no Dawn up, so I know this is his only swing, which is why I'm deciding whether or not I should get rid of 2 cards to save it. But I decide to let it go. And then my opponent clears my board. So super strong start for my opponent. But here I'm going to use my leader ability and play my Okiku. and then put 2 Dawn under leader and swing for 7 at the Okiku. I probably could have just swung for 7 first and then played the Okiku, but it didn't matter. He didn't have any Dawn up for Pump Gibson or anything, so I didn't have too much to worry about. And then here I played the Momo. The reason I'm doing this is it essentially works as if my opponent decides to, I'm making my opponent choose between either resting my Okiku or resting my Momo with the Okiku effect. And if he does the Momo, then at least the Momo kind of worked as a 1-drop blocker to save my Okiku. But if I only had the Okiku up, then he definitely would have rested it and only attacked it. That's still what he does anyway. But here I just try to save it as best I can. And I think that might have been a misplay on my opponent's side. He plays the Law and puts down another Okiku. He could have cleared my Okiku if he would have put a lot more Dawn under his Izo to attack. And so here, my opponent has 2 Okikus and a Law. I have 1 Okiku, my Momo, and my leader. So I'm most likely going to swing for 7 at the Okiku and rest the blocker, since my opponent only has 2 cards out of hand, or in hand. And I'm going to probably be able to clear a good portion of his board here. I use the Momo effect, see what I can get. I get the Odin, which is what you want to see. I could just put all 4 Dawn under my leader, which is what I decide to do. Actually, I don't. Okay, so the reason I don't is I want to kind of psych my opponent out that I could have a Paradise Waterfall by leaving 1 Dawn up. But I could have swung for 9, and I mean, either would have been okay. He swings for 5 in my Okiku, which means I know he's probably going to play his Odin. So I decide to save my Okiku by using a Raizo as a 1k counter. He swings for 6 this time, which same thing, leaves him 7 up so he can use leader ability and play his what I thought would have been his Odin, but he actually doesn't have the Odin, and instead plays the 7-drop Kid blocker. In the mirror matchup, board is the most important thing, which is why you see we're both pretty healthy on life still, even though we're almost at 10 Dawn at this point. I swing for 7 at the Okiku, that way if he decides to block with the killer, he has to give me a card out of hand. Which that is what he does. I have my own 7-drop that I could play, or I could have added more Dawn to the Okiku. I end up just swinging for 5 to see if he wants to give me his last card, and then I play my own Kid blocker. And I'm little by little dwindling my opponent out of resources, and that's all because I've had my Momo and I've been able to do a couple of searches with him. My opponent swings for 7 at my Okiku. I just let it go. I don't really have a lot of counter in hand, and then he puts everything under his 7-drop and swings. And I mean, I'm obviously gonna take that. So that leaves me with my 7-drop blocker still up. I still have my Momo. I have an Odin in hand, and I have the Kinemon, or my leader, that I could swing with. If I play my Odin here, I can't swing with my 7-drop blocker. And so what I do first is I just swing for 5. That way, if my opponent decides to block, I'll put Dawn under my kid and swing at his blocker, but he just decides to take, so it's just easy life. I use my Momo to search, and now that I have 9 Dawn, the best plays, just play the Odin, play the 1-drop blocker, and pass. Now we both have the same number of cards in hand, but I'm starting to gain a bigger board advantage. He plays his own Momonosuke and gets his Odin. He swings for 5 at my Momo. I block freely because I still have my Toki blocker if he decides to swing with this kid to destroy my kid blocker. And green doesn't have any rush, so anything you see on board is all you really have to worry about as far as attacks. He plays his own Odin. But at this point, my opponent's kind of 1 turn behind in a sense. And just every turn, what it's become is a grind game. Just every turn, little by little by little. I swing with my Momo at his Momo, just to either drain cards from his hand, or I already have a hand advantage over my opponent. So using my Momo effect doesn't matter as much. But if I can stop him from gaining resources, then that just gives me a little bit of an advantage. And he does use a 1k counter here. So in the same, I just swing with leader at him, at the Momo to get rid of it. Then I put 2 Dawn under my kid blocker, and I swing for 9 at life. Oh, he has to, if he's going to block with the kid, he has to give me 2 more cards out of hand. And same thing, I swing for 9 with my Odin. He decides to take. Then I use my Odin ability to restand. I have 4 Dawn up. So I could play a Bonnie. I could play a Beige, or I could even play a Raizo. And I think I go with the Raizo play. So I had 1 more Dawn under my Odin, so I don't leave any Dawn up. Swing for 10 at life. My opponent takes. And actually, it's not what I do. So I decide to play another blocker and leave 2 Dawn up, acting as if I have Punk Gibson. He plays 2 Izos, rests 2 of my blockers. Swings for 9 at the Odin, which I just use my Apu 2k counter. And then if he wants to swing at it again, then I will most likely counter out of it with my Bonnie and Raizo in hand to save it. So my opponent there spent his entire turn trying to get rid of my Odin, and just wasn't able to. And so he decides to concede. And with that, it's a GG. Now for this second game, we have a game against Magellan. This one I got to choose. And for a second, I thought about going first, because Magellan going first, if they play the character Magellan, can be pretty bad. But I mean, just playing Okiku turn 1 is just super strong. So I go second. My opponent doesn't have anything to play, so just puts everything on leader and then swings at life, which I just take. Then I draw another Okiku. So I could play either a second Okiku, or I also have the Raizo that I could play. I swing for 5 at life. My opponent decides to counter out of it, which I think is a mistake. Most of the time, you're pretty safe to just take the first life. Which, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter since he was going to take a life either way. Then I use my leader ability, play my Okiku, and then I use my Bonnie. And a lot of the times you don't want to play your searchers this early, for fear of them getting destroyed and then you losing all searchers. But I don't have a lot of counter in hand, so I would prefer my Bonnie to die over my Okiku. He plays his Magellan on curve, so we both put a Dawn back. But I have 2 Okikus that I can use to pressure it. I put 1 Dawn under the first one and swing 6 at the leader. And then tap the Magellan, which he counters out of it. And then now I have enough Dawn to keep attacking it. So I put 1 more Dawn under the second Okiku and swing at it for 6. My opponent lets it go, which is perfectly okay with me because he doesn't have any attackers now. And I lose 2 Dawn, but I keep board advantage. Then I put 1 Dawn under leader, swing for 6 at his leader, which he takes. And then I play another Bonnie. I was considering whether I should get the Apu or the Pump Gibson. I already have a Pump Gibson in hand and I don't have any Dawn available. So I take the 2k counter. Once again, my opponent swings at the Bonnie. So every turn, the Bonnie's been replacing itself and at the same time acting like a blocker in a way. He plays another Magellan, so it takes me back even more Dawn. So I'm only at 4 Dawn here. But I have a pretty sizable hand. And so I have a couple of things that I could do here. I swing for 5 at leader. The best play is probably just to swing 5, 5, and 5, and then keep the 4 Dawn up for the 2 Punk Gibsons that I have in hand. That's what I decided to do. Well, I do 6. Because instead of keeping up for the Punk Gibsons, I just decided to play the Raizo and keep a little bit of board pressure and then start drawing some more cards. Because with green you don't have a lot of counter, you kind of want to keep your cards on board that can get you more cards. He plays the Sadi, which puts the cow down. Then he puts 1 Dawn under his Magellan and swings for 7 at my Okiku. So the first Okiku goes down. Then he swings for 6 at the second one. So I just use a 2k counter. And then he leaves 2 up. So he's most likely so he either has a Judgment in hand or a Bagua. I'm at 6 Dawn. So I could play the Yamato. I swing for 6 at life and then just rest the cow. Since I don't have a lot of counter in hand, the cow can be pretty scary. So I want to try to deal with it as early as I can, especially before he puts any blockers on board. He does play the Hell's Judgment though, which I'm okay with, because now instead of doing just 2 like smaller attacks, I can just do. I had plenty of options. So even if he used a Judgment, I get it out of the way now. Then I can at least get rid of the Sadi with the Raizo, and I can play the Yamato and the Toki. Now I have a blocker on board. If he hadn't done that, I could have just put Dawn under my Kinemon and my Raizo, got rid of the cow. So either way, I was okay there. But I want to get the Hell's Judgment out of the way early if possible. He swings for 6 at the Raizo, which was gonna die anyway, and so I didn't want to use my blocker quite yet. Even if I try to save it there, then he could have attacked with the cow and then leader. So instead, I decided to save the Okiku earlier, and then now I just kind of decide to let it go. I don't have any counter in hand at all, which is what I was saying earlier. Green struggles with bad. I had 6 cards in hand and not a single counter. I could have left 2 up earlier for Gibson, and that could have technically been counter, but I mean that still only stops 1 attack. He plays, so he gets rid of my board and then plays the Douglas Bullet. So you'd think my opponent here is in a commanding situation, but I still feel pretty okay. I have my own Odin, so I could use leader ability and play Odin for 7. And so that's what I decide to do. I put 1 Dawn on my Yamato, swing for 7 at the cow. So if my opponent wants to save it, he has to pretty much give me his entire hand, which that's what he decides to do. He puts he gets rid of a 2k counter and then a 1k. So now this is a little bit more of a scary situation, because if I swing for 5 with my leader and he decides to save it, then he has a really scary board. So instead of playing the Odin this turn, I decide to swing for 7 at the cow so I can start whittling down at his board a little bit. Then I use my leader ability to play my Yamato, and I leave 2 up for Gibson to save my first Yamato. He plays a queen, draws 2, and gets rid of a cow. Then because he used the queen, it bumps up his leader. He decides to use his Douglas Bullet effect, which rests my other Yamato and gives it double attack. And he swings for 12 at life. I'm not entirely sure why, but I'm always going to take that. Then he swings for 6 at the Yamato, and because he swung first with the bullet, I'm able to have resources to save my Yamato. He probably should have just swung with the Magellan first, to possibly try to clear it, but he swings with the leader. To my first Yamato, I have a 2k counter to save out of it, and then my opponent leaves 2 Dawn up. He probably feels quite safe in this situation because he has a queen blocker, he has his Magellan, he has a Hell's Judgment. I swing for 9 at the Magellan because even if he has a Hell's Judgment, then he has to give me another card for it. But if not, then I just get rid of 2 Dawn. But either way, next turn I'll just go to 10 again anyway. So at this point, it doesn't matter, and it's just more valuable to get the blocker off board. I decide to swing for 6, with the Yamato at life. I kind of just want to see what my opponent is going to do here, whether he's going to play the Judgment or give me some cards out of hand. So I just swing for 5 with the Kinemon. I still have 7 Dawn available. Which means I could play either the Yamato and then leave a Gibson up. Or I have 7 exactly, so I can play my 7 drop blocker. That's what I decide to do. He plays the king, gets rid of my Yamato, then swings for 10 at life, which I just take. And my opponent decides to surrender because next turn I can just go for game. I have my Yamato, I had my 7 drop blocker, I had my leader, and he has 2 cards in hand. Now for game 3, we have a game against Doflamingo, which you would think is really favorable for Kinemon, as green normally is really strong against blue. But if you don't get the 8 drop, then the match can be very 50-50. Fortunately, I do have the Okiku on my first turn. My opponent did get to go first, but he doesn't have the Perona or the 1-drop blocker, or the 1-drop Dofi, sorry, to see the first cards in his deck. He does use the ability though and gets a Dofi. So he rearranges, but I'm off to the races here. I have the Okiku, I have the Yamato, so I'm able to clear his board and play a Momo for next turn. My opponent swings for 9 at the Okiku to get rid of it, as he recognizes that that's the biggest threat at the moment, and then uses leader ability to play the Mihawk from the top. And I do get rid of 3 cards to save the Okiku. In this specific matchup, board advantage is massive, and so the more characters that I can have on board to get rid of his characters on board, the better. Especially Okiku, who can rest his characters. And if blue doesn't have anything on board, then blue's not very scary. I swing for 5 first just to see if he'll give me any cards. Then I swing for 7 at the Mihawk. As I want to get cards out of his hand and get rid of his board. That's more important at the moment than just starting to attack his life. Because even if I swung just 5 at life, he'd probably just take it. I swing for 7 with the leader. Then I use the Momo effect to get a Toki. I play the Toki and I play the Bonnie. So I was I was just going to use the Bonnie effect. And that way if he wanted to try to attack either Searcher, I still had another one up. He only had his leader as an attacker. But I do get the Toki, so I play it so that I can serve as a blocker, so it can help save either my Kiku or my Yamato. He does play his 1-drop Dofi here, which is not the best considering not the best for me considering I have 3 1-drops on board, but he swings for 8 at my Yamato, uses leader ability, I block with the Toki, and then he leaves 2 up, representing a Love Beam. And I want to get rid of the Boa. As like I said, against blue, you want to get rid of their board, but also Boa represents a draw engine for him. And I want to drain him out of resources. So I swing for 7, and he gives me 2 cards, and I swing for 7 again. He does use the Love Beam there, draw another one. And now that I've gotten so I was swinging for 7s, even though I knew he had the Love Beam, because I could swing 7, 7, and 9, and now he doesn't have the Love. So he would have to give me his entire hand just to save the Boa there. And then I decided to use the Bonnie. The reason I decided to use the Bonnie instead of the Momo is because I'm searching for the 8-drop kid. As that card specifically is really massive in this matchup. He uses his Dofi effect to get rid of both of my searchers. And plays a Perona. He does trash his Mihawk, which unless he already has another Mihawk in hand, I think is a little bit of a mistake. Because I haven't played an Odin, I haven't played my 8-drop yet, so his Mihawk on board could have been a very sizable threat. Swings for 10 at my Yamato, which, I mean, it's going to die there. There's not much I can do. And I'm left with just my Okiku and my leader on board. I draw a Rizal for turn. I have the Odin in hand. I have a 7-drop in hand. But getting rid of that Moria is the most important thing at the moment. So I swing for 8 at it. And then my opponent actually gives me 2 cards out of hand, which is the best I could hope for there. And then I play my Odin for 7. So it seems like my opponent did have a second Mihawk in hand, and that's why he got rid of the first. He uses it to get rid of my Okiku, and then just starts swinging at life, which there's not too much I can do about it. I would rather keep all the counter in my hand to save my Odin. Here, I think I make a little bit of a mistake. I was doing the math, and I wanted to play a 1-drop, to play my Law, to play my Okiku, and then play the 1-drop again. But I ended up adding a Dawn to my leader and swinging for 6 here. And I should have just swung for 5. And that 1 extra Dawn play causes me to not have the extra blocker. Yeah, so this is where I'm realizing my mistake. I can't use my Odin ability and to restand it and replay the blocker. But so I mean, there's nothing I can do there. Thankfully, I do have a Gibson in hand though, and so it's not too big of a misplay. But if I hadn't had my Gibson, then things could be a lot more scary here. My opponent put 6 Dawn under his Perona and then swings for 8 because he doesn't really have too many more options. He's down to 1 card in hand because I've been dwindling his hand down the entire game, just getting rid of his board. I used the Gibson on the Perona because it's just a free 1 card block there. Then he swings for 9. I block with the Beige. And he doesn't swing with the Mihawk because he knows if he swings with the Mihawk, then it's just going to die on this coming turn. I swing for 5 with the Okiku at the Perona. I swing for 5 at life. Then here I'm just kind of doing some math. I still have 3 attacks available. I have the Toki in hand that I can play, and I have a 7-drop blocker. So I swing for 9 at life. Then use the Odin ability to restand. Swing for 9 at life again. Then I play the Raizo and the Toki. And again, I leave 2 up, representing as if I had another Gibson in hand. These little things are kind of what, I mean, I could have swung for 11 there. Or I could have swung for, 7 with my leader, but my opponent had 1 card in hand. And so that really didn't matter at the time. I knew he's going to take it anyway because he only had 1 card in hand. He needs and wants those resources. So the bluff is more important there. He swings for 9 at my Okiku and uses leader ability to play a Boa for 9. I'm just going to let it go. The reason he swung at 9 or for 9 is because he thought I had another Gibson in hand. And so since last turn, he kind of gave me that free Gibson swinging for 8 with the Perona. I mean, he kind of had to swing for 9 at this turn. And those are the little plays that can really make a difference sometimes. Then he uses the last of his Dawn to play another Boa. And passes over. He just has 1 blocker here though. And 3 cards in hand. So now it's just a numbers game. I swing for 9 at life. With the Odin, he takes. And now I have 3 attackers that are just, as long as I do 7, 7, 7, I swing for 7 with my Raizo, draw a card. He gives me 2 cards out of hand. Then I use my Odin ability. The reason I swung this way was so that I could draw the card with Raizo. Instead of just attacking back to back with the Odin. He blocks with the Boa that turn, and now I just swing for 9. And my opponent only has 2 cards in hand, so that's a GG. Now for the next game, we have the matchup against Zoro. And in this situation, I did decide to go first. Just because you don't really, with red, you don't really want them to go first too often. I mean, Strawbeard or Boatbeard, you're okay with them going first, but Zoro, Luffy, you don't really want them to go first. I play the Momo there because I know on my next turn it's a little safe to play. He can't play a Vista. He doesn't really have a way to get rid of it. So it was pretty safe. I could have also played the Beige. Either there is okay. I have an Izo and I have a Okiku. I decide to play the Izo here to get rid of his Nami. as if with red, if they only have the leader, then they're not quite scary. And here he actually gives me two 2k counters to save it. So instead of playing my Momo, I played the Beige, as I don't really have any other draw engine, and now I'm pretty low on cards in hand. He plays his Makino to pump up his Nami, swings for 5, I just take, then swings for 5 again. With the Zoro, I decide to take that as well. Didn't really want to get rid of my Bonnie. Then he swings for 5 this time with the Zoro, so he's going all in. And this one I decide to use my Apu to counter out of. I decided to swing for 7 at the Zoro to get rid of the Zoro. And so here I'm just going to clear board. Because my opponent used his 2k counters early, I know that he probably doesn't have a lot to save his board. And so the most important thing is kind of getting rid of it. I decide to play my Okiku in case he keeps playing a bunch of weenies or goes really wide. Then I have something to start tapping them and attacking them a little bit more. I could have cleared his first Nami, but just having the Okiku on board just seemed better. He puts some Dawn under his Nami, swings at my Izo, which I'm okay with. That means my Izo acted as a blocker in a sense. Then he swings for 7 at life, or I'm sorry, for 6 at life. Could block with the Beige here. I could take either is pretty okay. Then he plays the Sunny, which is exactly why I wanted to have the Okiku on board at this point, because here I can swing with the Okiku at the Nami and rest the Sunny, and then my leader can swing at the Sunny, and then my opponent's just left with his second Nami on board. And that's what I decide to do. Swing with the Okiku at the Nami, rest the Sunny. My opponent has 1 Dawn up, so could have a Radical Beam. But even if he does, a Radical Beam is just 2k worth of counter, since he still has 5 life. And with Zoro, or against Zoro, as long as you can make it to the mid and late game, then you're not too worried. I mean, he could play the 9-drop here, which would be a little scary. Or at least in the next couple of turns, he could play the 9-drop, it could be a little bit scary. But if they're out of hand and out of characters on board, then there's not much to worry about. I put 1 Dawn on my leader, swing for 6 at the Sunny, and then that leaves me with 5 Dawn. I play my Law Blocker to replay my Okiku, so that he doesn't have he can't attack it. Puts 1 Dawn under his Zoro leader, plays another Makino to pump up the Nami, and then swings for 9 at life. I just block with the Beige, as I figure he's probably going to have another Zoro in hand, which he actually doesn't. And he just puts the rest of it on his leader and swings for 9 at life. I don't have any counter. I don't want to lose my Law Blocker yet, so I just take. I get a Raizo out of life, then I draw, I get another Raizo. And here, I can clear his board now. And I still have a 7-drop in hand. I have 2 7-drops in hand, actually. So I could play 1 this turn, possibly play 1 next turn. And with 2 blockers on board, I feel pretty safe. Swing for 5 at the Nami. He just lets it go. Swing with the Okiku at the Makino. He lets it go. I still have 10 Dawn up, so I decide to play my... I have 9 Dawn, so I decide to play my 7-drop blocker, and then I keep enough up for the Gibson, as my opponent's been swinging for 8s and 9s mainly, but higher numbers, so I can either save my Okiku or I can save my life. Since I knew he was probably going to play the 9-drop here, and that's what I do. I decide to use my Gibson to save my Okiku and pass. My opponent passes anyway. He leaves 1 Dawn up, so he probably has a Radical Beam. Now, since my opponent doesn't really have any characters on board, now I can start going for life a little bit more. Kind of considering my moves here. I have another 7-drop blocker. I have a Toki, but the Toki will just die out to the Whitebeard. My Momo will probably also die to the Whitebeard. So I use my Momo ability first to kind of see what I get. I get 2 Momos and 2 Momos and 2 Odins. I decide to get another Momo just for the counter at this point. I put 2 under my blocker and swing for 9 at life. My opponent takes. I play another blocker and I just pass. My opponent puts 1 Dawn under leader. Plays the Otama on my Okiku. That's so he can use the Whitebeard ability. She puts 2 Dawn under the Whitebeard and swings to get rid of my Okiku. I use my Law to block. Plays a Vista to get rid of my Momo. And then swings for 6 at life, which I just block with one of my kids, as I still have another one to save it just in case, and my opponent leaves 3 Dawn up this time. I know my opponent has 3 cards in hand, but he's used a lot of his counter. He's used like 2 or 3 Makinos. He's already used 3 Otamas, so I know he doesn't have too much counter in hand. And so getting rid of this Whitebeard is the most important thing at the moment. So I put 7 on my kid, so it goes up to 14. And that way, if he wants to save it, he has to give me his entire hand, which he did happen to have a guard point and a Radical Beam, so he doesn't give me his entire hand, but at least I get those out. And I decide to just swing with put the rest of it on my other kid and swing for 10, and thankfully he doesn't have any counter there. And the Whitebeard goes down. Then I swing for 5 at life, which he takes, and now I feel a lot better in this matchup. He does play 2 Magras though to pump up his Otama, and swings for 8 at life, which I just block and then use 2 1Ks as I don't have any 2K counters. He swings for 7 at life, which I take. And this is where it gets a little scary, because if he has a Diablo Jambe in the next couple of turns, then it can get pretty hairy for me. He decides to swing for 6 though, which I'm not. Oh, it's because he had another Zoro. So he swings for 6. I block with my kid, and then I have 2 1K counters to stop the Zoro swing. And my opponent's down to 0 cards in hand. So it's just a nice easy. I don't have to worry about putting extra Dawn on anything. I swing for 5 at the Zoro, get rid of the Zoro. I play the Momo, try to draw some counter here. I was looking to see if I could get a blocker. I don't get a blocker, so I just grab the 2K counter. And then here I can play the Yamato and the Toki so that I have a third blocker on board. But I do want to put Dawn under my kids so that I can swing with them and at the same time have them restand at the end of the turn. So that's what I do. Put 1 Dawn and swing, even at little Otama. I don't want to have to worry about any shenanigans. He happens to draw another Makino or a Mag or just anything that can pump it up. And so then I play my Yamato. I rest the Magra. I mean, I don't have anything to attack it with, so it doesn't matter. But it's really just to play a Toki so that I have a 3rd blocker on board. My opponent has 3 blockers, or 3 characters that can attack. 2 characters, sorry, and the leader that can attack. I have 3 blockers. And he has no cards in hand. So unless he happens to just draw the Diable Jambe, I mean, and if he does that, then, I mean, he just deserves it at that point, you know? It's just, he would have had the heart of the cards. He swings for 5. I block with the kid. He swings for 5 again. I probably block with the 2nd kid. I was worried about him having a Vista. Because if he would have had a Vista, then, and I had blocked here, then I would have had no blockers and that could have been game. So instead I just decided to counter out of that one instead of taking the free block. And then he swings for 8. And here I block with the Toki, and my opponent passes. And my opponent decides to surrender as he just sees that little by little. He probably doesn't even play the Diable Jambe in his deck. He just sees that little by little I'm going to start steamrolling the advantage that I had. And so with that, let's go to the final thoughts of the game. Or final thoughts of the deck, sorry. Overall, the deck performed quite well. There are some matchups where, because you don't really have a lot of counter in this deck, can get really hairy, especially if the opponent starts clearing your board. As green, if you don't have a board, there's nothing you can do. You don't really have any like surprise factors. You don't have any rush. You don't have anything of that nature that can kind of like get you back into the game. All you can really do is kind of gain advantage and then slowly maintain it and dwindle your opponent's resources away. So there are some changes that you could probably make to this deck. You could consider running a few more blockers, mainly, you know, your killer blockers. You could run some more counters. I did notice that while in that Zoro matchup, the 7-drop did really well. Overall, I think it's the meta has become so quick. And there's just so much destruction in the meta that it feels a little slow sometimes. So you could probably lower your 7-drop count a little bit. And then play some more of those smaller blockers or play some more counters. I would even up the Odin possibly to 4, as Odin on curve is just really, really good. And there are times where you wish you had it, and then because you didn't see it, then games kind of get out of your control. Outside of that, the deck performed really, really well. Don't have too many complaints. The law blocker itself as well, maybe I would bump up to 3 actually. And then just a few more weenies here and there just to be able to use his effect. Green still feels like it's in a really strong spot, but there's just times where there's nothing you can do is the problem with green. Especially when you play against a red that just draw the nuts. That just feels terrible. But overall, it was a really fun deck. I definitely recommend giving it a try. And yeah, that's it for the video. I just wanted to say to everyone, I really appreciate all the support that I've been getting. If you enjoyed this or if you enjoyed any of the videos, please consider giving a like to this video or any of the other videos. Please consider subscribing to the channel, as it really helps out. And little by little, we're really growing. I've really been enjoying playing the game. I've really been enjoying making the content, and I really want to continue. So yeah, with that, I hope you all have an amazing day.